Good morning, and it is time for pre-market PulseScan with yours truly, Dex the Algo Capitalist, aka the Vulcan, coming to you live from PulseWaveTrading.com, home of the world famous PulseWave price trigger reports that we put in your hand each and every trading day. Happy Monday to ya. All right, give me just a second. I didn't realize that I got feedback coming in. Okay. It's funny because if you're on the dashboard, which I was perusing the dashboard, it goes live right there on on your dashboard too for those that are subscribers to the PulseWave Price Trigger Report. So I thought that was very funny that I just had that on and forgot about it. All right, so hopefully everyone had a wonderful, wonderful weekend. It's time to get back to the grind, man, to get in these markets and do what we need to do up in these markets. I want to give a shout out to the trading room. Thank you very much for bringing things to my attention. Yesterday evening, there were some issues with the forex report, so I reran that. So that should be copacetic. And as a matter of fact, I reposted pretty much most of the reports. I just reran them, so they should all be on and rocking. The algo shifts are in full effect, so be ready, be prepared for that. It's already starting to move and shake up in these markets. And I'm about to show you exactly what I'm talking about. And we do have some very life-changing, life-altering news that we need to get into as well, and we shall do just that. First things first, though, let's look at these prices. The Dow is up 191 points right now at 26,168. Go Dow futures. NASDAQ 100, the E-mini NASDAQ 100 futures are up 96 and a quarter at 10,933 even. The E-mini S&P 500 is up 21 and three quarters at 3,200 and a quarter. And you got the Russell My Hustle at up 13.4 points at 1433. The Russell My Hustle. Bitcoin futures composite index is up $85, trading at 9,360. Oh, I didn't notice this. Okay, so we got a bullish two-bar Charlie setup in the Bitcoin futures composite index this morning. I didn't even notice that until now that I'm just reading it with you. So wow. All right, all day up day is expected for the Bitcoin. Let's see if it can do it. And it's funny because on the algo chart, the Bitcoin futures composite index is in the Kumo cloud of consolidation and confusion and chaos. But it has a locked in bearish pulse wave. Locked in. Locked all the way in. The trend momentum reading is locked in bear market. All right, so momentum, everything pointing straight down. But within all of that, there has been some buying. It looks like either someone's trying to, pick the bottom here and catch the falling knife, and they believe in this being a true support area. And or we could be having a little bit of profit taking on the shorts as well. All I know is the 9,000 support level that I gave you seems to be holding up for several weeks now and counting. Go pulse waves. All right, we got the nat gas right now is flat at $1.80. Crude oil futures are down 37 cents at $40.17 a barrel. The long bond is down 25 seconds, trading at 179.01. That's 179 and 1/32. That's a pretty significant pullback, and you know what that means? Higher interest rates. Can't help but for the rates to pop up. So for you mortgage people out there looking to refinance or whatever, you floating rates, probably don't want to do that today. I wouldn't be trying to float a rate today. You can expect a difference depending on lenders, anywhere from a quarter basis point to even a full half, depending on where you're going. But expect across the board at least a quarter point difference in your mortgage rates today. All right, so that means higher, not lower. Quarter point higher than what it was on Friday. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but that is what it is. And right now we are flirting with taking out the overnight low. So if you were floating interest rates, you probably want to stop and go ahead and lock that in today. Just saying. All right, looking at gold. Gold is up $12.50, trading at $1,814.60 per ounce and rising. Right now, we're trading near the highs of the session. Silver, though, is the big story of the day. Silver is up 60 cents, trading at $19.65 an ounce, just a few ticks away from from this morning's high. So they're both flirting with the highs of the session. And it should be noted, just coming in here real quick, for those that are so not initiated and have not taken that leap to purchase the PulseWave price trigger reports. Here's what you don't know. What you don't know is that gold right now has been in a bullish position longer than silver has. However, both of these metals right now, even though they're locked in on a bull market and their momentum is locked in, you have negative bot checks. Those who've been with me for years know what a bot check is. Negative bot checks. Negative bot checks can impact the amount of liftoff you get in a bull market or the amount of sell-off you get in a bear market. It doesn't necessarily correlate to that all the time, but it can. But in this situation, it is having the opposite effect. All right, so that's a good thing for those that are bullish in the metals at this moment. If you have not been trading in the quote unquote paper markets, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But suffice it to say, these markets look really, really great today. As far as that real powerful trend momentum is concerned, that can relock back in at any time. If it relocks in between today and tomorrow, you can expect explosive moves by the end of the week. Explosive moves higher. So that would be pretty dope. I've seen it where we can have positional situations like this where you can see silver, rise up a full dollar from the start off point, which would be today. Same thing with gold. I've seen gold, it can move up like 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks when these lock-ins take place. It's a very special time in a bull market where this can happen. I can't say the same thing for the stock indexes. Save a couple, but not all of them. Like for instance, even the S&P 500 today is in the same predicament, the same setup as gold and silver today. Same identical setup as far as trend and trend momentum is concerned, and it is really strong today. So as you can see, these similarities do play out in other markets across the board. Even those that are traditionally non-correlated. Now the Dow futures, on the other hand, it's semi like that. Basically, you're pulse waving positive in the Dow futures, but you've been in a downdraft, in a correction type of a situation. Not full blown correction, but like pullback type correction. But you're still pulse waving positive. So these pullbacks are being bought in the Dow. But it should be noted that technically speaking, on the weekly, we are pulse waving nice. But on the daily, we're not pulse waving at all this morning. Now, isn't that something? You got the NASDAQ pulse waving positive. You got the Russell futures pulse waving positive, and you got the E-mini S&P 500 pulse waving positive, but the Dow has yet to pulse wave this morning. Nowhere near it. So this is very interesting. Is the Dow trying to take center stage and take leadership and is saying, no, we're pretty much topping out? Or is the Dow playing catch up? It should be noted that out of all the four indices I just noted, the Dow is the only one whose trend picture, whose complexion is not as strong as the other three. It is a rare situation to get the S&P 500 decoupling in a way from the Dow. They're usually lockstep with each other, married, sewed together at the hip. But that is not the case right now at this very moment. The Dow is, for all intents and purposes, moving in a different direction than the other three indices. So very interesting setups to start the week off right now. All right, let's finish up here. We got the US dollar index down 17 pips at 96.47. It's not too far away from the lows of the session. It's been another narrow range type of a trade today. So technically speaking, you can make an argument that it's flat, but it's still weak and trading in the lower 96s now. We've passed the halfway threshold, and we're now in the bottom range of the range, threatening to possibly break into that 95 handle. So that is showing you that the dollar is under a great deal of pressure. The euro right now is up 37 pips at 113.53. Pound sterling is off 10 pips at 126.23. The Aussie is up 27 pips at 69.76. Canadian dollar is off 47 pips at 135.48. And the euro yen is up 66 pips at 121.53. All right, dollar yen up 33 pips at 107.24. And the Kiwi is up 6 pips at 65.79. Looking at food. See, this is what I was telling you, where you're starting to get breakdowns in the marketplace. Soybeans are down 8 3/4 points, trading at 8.82. Ouch. That's well below that 9.10, 9.12 handle we had last week. Corn right now is down 6 3/4 points at 3.38. And wheat is down 3 1/4 at 5.30 3/4. Very interesting setups we got here in the food, because with the dollar weakness, that's usually a boon to commodities. You could make the argument that gold and silver are acting like commodities today because they're rallying on the back of the dollar weakness. But on the flip side, you got your grains moving in the same direction as your dollar. So they're not acting like commodities. They're acting like something else. They're acting like equities today. All right. So supply and demand for commodities is like earnings for equities. So what's happening is the argument will be made, well, we have such a glut of grain and we have no one to buy because the trade wars, China is not ordering from us or whatever, and our stuff is just rotting in the ground. That's basically what they're trying to get you to believe, is that the stuff is just rotting in the ground. All right. So again, the traditional offsets are not working. Even if that were the case, you would get some type of a bump just because of the weakness of the dollar. Again, you're not seeing these traditional offsets come into play here, which is problematic, to say the least. Problematic. Let's look at the overnight news now with these markets. So as you see, global stocks are surging despite record numbers of new coronavirus infections as investors focus on the start of earnings season. China's Shenzhen composite surged 3.5%, while U.S. futures are pointing to a positive open on the first day of a week that will see several U.S. bank Q2 earnings. We will get into the banks and their earnings a little later. Warren Buffett likely bought back more than $5 billion of Berkshire Hathaway stock in recent weeks, filings show. The amount is triple the value of his buybacks in the first quarter and is likely an effort to capitalize on his company's huge cash reserves and depressed stock price. Pepsico beats revenue estimates on increased snack consumption. Food and beverage giant PepsiCo saw revenues fall in the quarter, but less than expected as salty snacks proved popular with customers. Net revenue fell to $15.95 billion from $16.45 billion. Analysts had estimated $15.38 billion in revenue. Well, I think I can explain that. I don't remember where I saw it. I think it was a movie, and they were showing how when you're eating junk food, you got to have your salt and you got to have your sugar. How they balanced each other out. So if you're eating a honey bun, it'd be great to have some potato chips with it, because now the saltiness offsets the sugar and it's like beautiful to the palate. Dutch bank NIBC has agreed to a takeover bid from private equity giant Blackstone, it said on Monday. The bid values NIBC at just over €1 billion, which is 1.13 billion US dollars. It was previously about 25% higher before the coronavirus pandemic hit, which pushed Blackstone to lower its offer. Alibaba founder Jack Ma sold almost $10 billion of stock in the e-commerce giant, according to a regulatory filing. Ma has cut his stake in the company from around 6.4% to 4.8% in the past year, representing sales of around $9.6 billion at the stock's current price. All right, so again, I can't prove this, but the way that dude is moving, it sounds like he listens to the broadcast. So hand clap for Jack Ma taking profit on the way up like he's supposed to do. He's taking money off the table. He is building cash reserves. I don't blame him. If you knew what was coming, like he knows what's coming, you will be doing the same thing. More than 15,000 jobs could be at risk at German auto giant Daimler, a board member said over the weekend. Not 500 jobs, not 1,000 jobs, not 1,500 jobs, but 15,000 jobs. Wilfried Porth told the Stuttgart Zeitung that more than 15,000 workers would now have to take a buyout or retire to avoid forced layoffs. AI startup UiPath raised another $225 million in venture funding, the company said Monday, boosting the automation firm's overall valuation to $10.2 billion. CEO Daniel Dine said the monster funding bolsters UiPath's leadership in one of the hottest sectors in tech, as he reaffirmed the startup's intention to go public in 2021. A portfolio manager invested in Berkshire Hathaway explains why Warren Buffett could still be a post-pandemic winner, even as naysayers call him washed up. Buffett can hunt for bargains if the virus worsens, while Berkshire's earnings will rebound if the threat subsides, Pelican Bay's Tyler Hart said. Earnings season for Q2 kicks off this week. Atlas Financial and Wintrust Financial are among those to report later on Monday. Market mover events to watch today is two members of the Federal Reserve's FOMC, John Williams and Robert Kaplan, are delivering speeches, while data on the federal budget balance will also be released. All right. 2-minute warning. The opening bell is about to ding. That's a 2-minute warning on that. For those that need to handle some business, place some orders, the things you should have done on Sunday night if your broker allows you to do such a thing. All right, it's time. It's time. We just went over the overnight market and overnight market news, but now it's time. The age of man is over. Now it's the age of the all. Put on your big boy and big girl pants, ladies and gentlemen. It is time to go deep as we dive into what's really moving the markets. Wouldn't you like to know? Wouldn't you like to be your pepper too? Be your pepper. Drink Dr. Pepper. Y'all remember that commercial? All right, here we go. The world is drowning in debt, just in case you didn't realize it. And there's the opening bell. Handle your business. According to the IMF, global fiscal support in response to the crisis will be more than 9 trillion US dollars, which is approximately 12% of world GDP, not US GDP, world GDP. This premature, clearly rushed, probably excessive, and often misguided chain of so-called stimulus plans will absolutely, positively distort public finances in a way in which we have not seen since World War II. The enormous increase in public spending and the fall in output will lead to a global debt figure close to 105% of GDP. So let me get this straight. Your monthly income is $100, but your monthly debt is $105. How long will you survive without being forced into bankruptcy? Oh yeah, I like that Dougie Fresh one. I like that one. But I should have did it earlier, because then I could have said 6 minutes, 6 minutes, 6 minutes. Dougie Fresh, you're on. Yeah, that was the joint. That when I heard that Dougie Fresh the Show song, man, in high school, I will never forget it. It blew my mind. True story. Side note, true story. At that time, before I heard that song, I wasn't listening to no rap. I wasn't listening to nothing. Only thing I was listening to was metal. All right. I became a metalhead in 7th grade, and I remained a metalhead into my freshman year of high school. I'll never forget it. 9th grade, I'm in high school, hanging out with my buddies, and they were telling me about rap songs. Have you heard this? We think about this group, and this it was like a new group. Seemed like it was coming out every day, and I was like, it's all right. It's all right, you know. And I'm like, yo, where your Metallica at? Where's your Twisted Sister? Where's your Iron Maiden at? You know what I'm saying? Where that metal at? What's up with that? And they didn't know what I was talking about, and we were laughing. But life-changing event. My auntie and was having a party at her boyfriend's house. They were having a party in the basement. Now, I have an auntie that's only a few years older than me, and an uncle that's only 1 year older than me. And I went with them. I was like, I never really been to one of those before, and who cares? So I went, and all of a sudden, dude put on the show by Dougie Fresh. Man, that thing blew my mind. I was like, oh my, I was so hooked. I was like, what is that? I had never heard anything like that before. That song right there, in my opinion, changed everything. Remember what I told you? I told you about them 80s. We talked about this last week, man, the 80s. When I heard that song, it changed everything. I had never heard a song like that in any category or genre of music. No song sounded like that. No song. That song had everything in it. It had a crazy beat. It had horns. I heard so many dudes beatboxing in it. I was like, who is this Dougie Fresh dude? Beatboxing was insane. Everyone had heard the Fat Boys and knew about the Fat Boys, but I ain't know about Dougie Fresh. Dougie Fresh was crazy. Him and Slick Rick on the song. That song had everything in it, and that changed my life. And I started listening to rap from that point on. And I was like, oh, this is incredible. So that was my little side step into that real quick. So yeah, that reminds me of that, man. Good looking out with that one. Dougie changed the game, man. Him and Slick Rick changed the game. All right, so back to this debt situation. We cannot escape this. We got to deal with this because this is going to lead to some stuff that I'm going to be talking about a little later, and I got to give you the background for it. Because forewarned is forearmed, ladies and gentlemen. I've been telling y'all about the huge algo shift that was coming. Well, it's here now, and you can see it in these markets. You've seen these drastic turnarounds in several different markets. And I'm going to explain to you why that is, and we're going to go deep. Here we go. Now, if we add government and private debt, we're talking about 200 trillion US dollars of debt. Not to mention a global increase of over 35% of GDP, well above the 20% seen after the 2008 crisis, and all in a single year. This is happening all in a single year, and we're only halfway through 2020. This brutal increase in indebtedness is not going to prevent different economies from falling rapidly. All right, there's no way around it. Now, the main problem of this global stimulus chain is that it is entirely oriented to support bloated government spending and artificially low bond yields and propping up zombie companies. All right. That is the reason why such a massive global monetary and fiscal response is not doing much to prevent the collapse in jobs, investment, and growth. Most businesses, especially the small ones with no debt and no assets, are being wiped out. Now, tell me how rational, logical is that? Most businesses, the small ones with no debt and no assets, are being wiped out. Gone. Poof. Bye-bye. Most of this new debt has been created to sustain a level of public spending that was designed for a cyclical boom, not a crisis, and to help large companies that were already in trouble in 2018 and 2019. And that's why we call them zombie companies, because it's just a skeleton, it's just a frame. Imagine a big, tall skyscraper building with just a frame. It had, and you put something on the outside of it. It looks like bricks and mortar, but it's really not. It's paper mache, but it's done in such a good way that it looks like a finished building. But it's only till you walk up to the building and touch it that you realize that all they did was put the frame up and covered it with Play-Doh. All right, and you're like, here you go. Here's your building. No, no. But that's what we've done, and we've been doing it since, I want to say 2000, since March of 2000. Now, according to Bank of International Settlements, the percentage of zombie companies, those that cannot cover their debt interest payments with operating profits, has exploded in the period of giant stimuli and negative real rates, and the figure will skyrocket again and again and again. That is why all this new debt is not going to boost the recovery. It will likely prolong the depression. even if we don't shut down again in the fall, even if there is no round two of the pandemic virus, you still are going to be facing this situation. There's no way around it. No way around it. It is what it is. All right? It is what it is. Now, debt is neither free nor irrelevant. Even if interest rates are low, the interventionists want us to believe more debt means less growth, a slower exit from the crisis with lower productivity growth and a tepid employment improvement. The often repeated argument that it would have been worse if these bailouts and spending plans had not been implemented and that nothing else could have been done is easily rebuttable. Countries that will fall the least in 2020 recover first and do so with the lowest unemployment rates are the ones that have maintained prudent spending plans, preserved the economic fabric, and addressed the health crisis with serious protocols. South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Austria, Switzerland, Sweden, Ireland, Luxembourg, Netherlands, many countries have not fallen into the trap of massive government spending, have delivered better health and economic results than most nations, and have done so with lower levels of interventionism. Many countries show that it is not necessary to cover the economy with enormous budget imbalances to guarantee health. In other words, you're not going to drink rat poison to heal yourself of an upset stomach. It doesn't make any sense. Again, they're doing the opposite of what you should be doing. And side note, these are people that have doctorates in economics. They have doctorates in economics and finance. Just let that marinate for a moment. These are educated individuals who went to Ivy League universities. Think about that. It is important to remember that these figures of enormous indebtedness because of the disconnection between financial markets and the real economy, which has reached almost record levels and presents bubble-type features. First, these huge stimuli are probably too big, too soon, and clearly geared towards sustaining low productivity sectors. All this is supported by a monetary policy that has gone from providing liquidity to being the enabler of asset bubbles. And it doesn't make any sense because, again, if your expenses are $105 a month, but you only bring in $100 a month, something's not getting paid. You don't have enough. It doesn't have to be that big of a deficit. If you don't make enough to cover your basic expenses, you're done. Again, if your mortgage by itself is $2,500 a month, but you only bring home $1,500 a month, you're losing the house. Debt doesn't really matter because I have a credit card that has an infinite balance. There is no limit. Okay, so just because you have a card with no limit doesn't mean that you still don't owe the money. It doesn't mean that you're not running a deficit. You're running a deficit, and it matters because that means that someone's not getting paid. The government is not exempt from that, even though they own a printing press and they can print $1 zillion. They can print a Googleplex of dollars. And it will still not be enough if you owe infinity. It's not enough. You can't print enough if you owe infinity. And that's where the governments are right now. They owe infinity. They owe an infinite amount of money above and beyond what the country takes in. Period. Hands down. You can't get out of debt by creating more debt. It doesn't make sense. It is mathematically impossible, scientifically impossible. You do not get out of debt by creating more debt. It's just a never-ending circle. And once again, someone is not getting paid. You're not paying your bills. The balance sheet of the European Central Bank has increased by almost 2 trillion euros so far this year. Within the first 6 months of this year, 2 trillion euros. And it's already more than 52% of the Eurozone's GDP. Much higher than that of the Federal Reserve, which is 32.6% of the GDP of the USA, or the Bank of England at 31.1%. The Bank of Japan's balance sheet already accounts for 117% of GDP, and its consequences should be a warning sign to all nations. Consumption has plummeted again in May, and the country has been stagnant for 2 decades. That's 20 years with debt that will exceed 260% of GDP. Copying Japan is the recipe for secular stagnation. Again, these individuals have advanced degrees in economics and mathematics, and they don't know this. They don't get this. The huge increase in the balance sheet of central banks to artificially keep bond yields low has pushed stock markets higher, just as 80% of listed companies have abandoned their business profit targets, and analysts are slashing estimates for 2020, 2021, and 2022 at the fastest speed in the past decade, according to JP Morgan and Bank of America. So they can't say they don't know and they didn't think about unintended consequences, because the last time I checked, there was no one working at the Fed or at the U.S. Department of Treasury that was under the age of 19, that didn't have their fully developed cerebral cortex in place where they could understand consequences. The enormous action of central banks leads to an unprecedented disconnection between the real economy and the stock markets. The expansion of multiples has accelerated just as earnings estimates plummet. And here we go again with another earnings season. By making sovereign bonds prohibitively expensive, 2 dangerous things happen. 1, governments believe low bond yields are due to their policies. And 2, investors take much more risk than what they think they have in their portfolios. Result? Well, it all looks harmless if the bubble expands and the placebo effect works. But if macro earnings and unemployment data remain disappointing, the next crash may be worse than the economic shutdown, because it may add a financial crisis to the already weak economy that is already in crisis. So you're adding crisis upon crisis. Now, unfortunately, when the next crash happens, governments and central banks will tell us that more stimulus is warranted. So here you go, you're getting a final bill notice, and you say, I know how to take care of that. Let's spend some more money, which is really crazy. That's a good question, Mike. Mike wants to know, is this a case that they don't know this, or they do know, but there is an underlying agenda at play? It is unfortunately the latter, not the former. Once again, they're without excuse because they have advanced degrees in economics and mathematics. How do you not know this? And if they don't know it, then that means whatever university they went to, the professor needs to be fired, and so does the head of the university, because they're teaching misinformation and disinformation on subject matters. That means they're not covering the breadth and the scope of the subject matter, and they're giving out purposely false information. So which is it? Either the student didn't catch on and couldn't grasp the information, or the university is guilty of peddling misinformation and disinformation on various subject matters. It's either one or the other. Is the student incompetent, or are the universities incompetent? Or sadly, both. And again, if that is the case, do you want them running your country? Do you want them running the Department of Treasury? Do you want them working at the Fed? Now, I know what people are thinking. Here we go. The Fed is a private corporation. So technically speaking, the Fed isn't doing anything wrong. The Fed is acting like a bank. It is lending money. If people want to continue to get more money out of the bank will say, fine, you can have it. Not a problem. We love you. I love you. All right? They're doing the thing that you would do if you were running a central bank. You would say, yes, free money to everyone for as long as they need it. Why not? And you know why you would do that? Because if every nation on the earth owes you money, then that means you own every nation on the face of the earth. Because what? The borrower is slave to the lender. So now the central banks, technically speaking, have managed to enslave the entire planet in debt. All right. Okay, Mike, you make another good point, my man, in the live chat. He says, from a spiritual side, maybe the next global crisis is the igniter to bring forth the man of perdition. Now, I can't dismiss that, because we know that the man of perdition does come into play due to upheaval, worldwide upheaval. And he comes in and says, I have a plan to fix everything. Trust me. And he makes things better for a short period of time. Okay. So that's very telling. We don't know if it's on the back of, nuclear or Holocaust, or if it's financial. I'm going to say this, though. I know a lot of people think of financial. I mean, they think of, military Holocaust. They think thermonuclear war, global thermonuclear war. The World War III kicks off and it's global thermonuclear war. And it could very well be that. But very few people talk about, hey, what if the real crisis is not, World War III, global thermonuclear war, but what if it's a literal financial crisis that's worldwide? What if every country on the face of the earth goes into extreme economic depression? That would shock a lot of people. That would blow people away. For sure. For sure. Man, Blair's has one. He said universities is subsidized by special interests to promote authorized Prussian outcome-based doctrine. Yeah, I have to give you, yeah. It's all propaganda. I mean, what else are we left with? You can't have it both ways. Either one or both parties are incompetent. Which is it? Do you want to believe that the Ivy League universities are incompetent and that they are teaching dis and misinformation to their students on various subject matters? Or do you want to say, no, the students are incompetent because they're unable to grasp the information? All right, so if it's the students, then everyone should be fired that works at the Treasury and that works at the Federal Reserve from a corporate perspective. But then again, I have to always lean back to, why would you fire anyone at the Fed when they're doing their job. The Fed's job is to print money. It's to give people money who want money, who beg for money. That's how they make their money. Now, they know you can't pay them back. It's at least not with money. So what does that give them the right to do? Take your possessions. What is the possession of the world governments? Their natural resources for one, and their human capital for two. Think about it. Federal Reserve, along with the central banks, are doing what they should be doing, which is giving people more debt that beg for it, so that they could take over their natural resources and their human capital. Isn't that something? Just something to think about. Something to think about. And then not only that, but the man of perdition is supposed to be a Jew. And, we got two lines of the Jews. We got the banking line, and then we have the godly line that are loyal to the Messiah. So those that follow the path of the Messiah and accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior is one branch, but they don't control anything. It's the banking branch. It's the lawless ones. Those are the ones that went into banking. Those are the ones that own all the money and the natural resources of the world. They indebt the world. It would make sense that if he came up in that side of things, rise up and merge together all the central banks with the Federal Reserve in a UN type of a way, and he would take over, because it's the central banks that have all the money. The governments don't have any money. They could easily say, okay, you guys work, all your militaries work for us now. It's a one world military owned and operated by the central banks. We have taken over. They can say, shut up and sit down. You can't do anything. You owe us money. Since you can't pay us, we are now invading over. Think about it. People say, oh, that would never happen. Never say never. So yeah, just something to think about, man. Just something to think about, So just always keeping your eyes open. Always using your critical thinking skills. Now this leads us into the next situation, which is the too big to fail banks. Now, the banks are letting you know they're getting ready for their worst quarter since the financial crisis. They know this. They're already warning about this. They know this is coming. U.S. banks could be setting up for their worst quarter in more than a decade, as loan loss provisions and the pandemic are set to wreak havoc on bottom lines. Next week, many of the too big to fail banks are set to report earnings and are likely going to show that a drop in consumer spending and higher loan losses were not offset by better trading gains. Loan loss provisions should reach their highest level since the financial crisis, according to Barclays. They're predicting that. Sanders and Edward Jones were, quote, we've got a full 3 months of the pandemic coming through the numbers now. The first quarter was rough, but it will really only reflect a couple of weeks in March, end quote. So we have a lending trouble. We have loan loss provisions seen continuing to weigh on banks' earnings. Loan losses are expected to rise as spiking unemployment has left many unable to service or pay back their loans. What do you call someone who can't pay their bills? You call them a deadbeat. New loans have also dried up as banks tighten their belts. Service charges and credit card fees are also likely going to fall as large portions of the American economy shut down for months, suffocating economic activity on purpose. And while many banking stocks have recovered somewhat, the S&P 500 financial index is still down 26% since last December. What do you call a bear market traditionally on Wall Street? Being down 10, 20%. Yeah. Yeah. If you're down 20%, that's a bear market. Wells Fargo alone is down 55% this year and is expected to announce a dividend cut. Dividend cuts are a death sentence to any stock. You start cutting dividends, money starts outflowing from you immediately because people are looking for income. The only reason they held your stock was because of the income. You take away the income, they're going to move their money out. Wells Fargo alone is down 55% this year, ladies and gentlemen, and they're covering their dividend as a result. Now, Bloomberg has predicted that despite increasing provisions in the first quarter of the year, banks are still going to have their worst quarter in a decade when they report this upcoming week. Wells Fargo's chief financial officer, John Shrewsbury, commented last month that the bank would likely set aside more for bad loans in Q2 than the $4 billion it set aside in Q1. Now, this is interesting because remember, as I told you guys some time ago, Wells Fargo at one point was considering becoming the Federal Reserve. They had so much money, they were thinking about becoming the second Federal Reserve, like straight up, not even being funny. I'm being serious. They actually used those words, those exact words. And this was back during before the financial crisis really hit the wires. All right. Now, banks will be looking to trading and underwriting to help try and salvage the quarter. Stock and bond trading was likely up about 31% in Q2, according to estimates. Meanwhile, JP Morgan is expected to post the largest increase of about 50%. Citigroup's Richard Zagheb, global head of the debt capital markets division, said he thinks there will be a record volume in trading for the quarter. Now, this stands at odds with previous cyclical downturns where investment banking and trading revenue will fall as much as 30%. Now, data compiled by Bloomberg shows that U.S. investment-grade corporate bond issuance doubled in Q2 to $757.7 billion, and high-yield issuance was up 61% to $130.1 billion. Mortgage data looks promising too. Loan rates continue to entice buyers. Of course, low rates should do that, with the average mortgage rate now just 3.03%. Now, spreads between what loans for and what they charge borrowers are the highest they have been since 2008. Despite the fact that Q2 could be ugly, many think the pain would be temporary. As the world continues to deal with COVID and economics continue to reopen, things should return to some semblance of normalcy in the coming year, analysts predict. RBC concluded in a recent report, our outlook is cautiously optimistic as we expect the economy to continue to gain momentum into the end of the year, end quote. Our end That's rubbish. Rubbish. Right now is probably the worst time to get in the real estate game. It is not ready yet. You're looking at housing prices set to fall at least 40%. That's right. Home valuations could fall as much as 40% within the next 12 months. 40%. Because people are running out of the cities and going into the country and the suburbs. People are losing jobs. You got now the threat of rising interest rates. Yeah, this is looking whack. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. It's looking bad, people. Open your eyes. Open your eyes. Now, here's the biggest punch in the face to really break down what I just said to you. The world's largest pension fund lost the equivalent of Bitcoin's entire market cap in just 3 months. The world's largest pension fund posted a first quarter loss of $165 billion, which is the equivalent to the Bitcoin entire market capitalization. Think about that for a minute. Think about that. Which fund are we talking about? Japan's Government Pension Investment Fund, or GPIF, decreased in value by almost 11% to 150.63 trillion yen, or $1.4 trillion. This was the fund's steepest quarterly decline since 2008. Now, again, I don't know what their rules are there, but a lot of these pension funds are like glorified mutual funds. They can't go short. They can only go long. And they got to be like 60% funded or whatever. Now, GPIF was not alone in its poor performance. Major stock indexes have also had negative numbers. All right. Now, again, we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks how a lot of hedge funds have been, going out to pasture, closing up shop. All right. Giving people their money back. And this is just more. Pension funds, folks, are hurting. I'm trying to tell y'all something. You can't count on that pension. What's going to happen when the stuff hits the fan? What's going to happen? What is going to happen? I'm just saying. It's one of those things, man. It's one of those things. All right, someone in the live chat has a question. They say, wouldn't people selling their city homes and buying cheaper country homes cause prices to rise? Well, see, you would think that, but see, even if that was true, let's examine it. Even if that was true, prices still would not be rising in the city. They would be falling because those sellers will be desperate to unload those. Yes, you could see a bump in the country and in the suburbs, but it still wouldn't help. The city would still be in decline. If everyone left the city and moved out further, the city would die. There'd be, come think about it. That's a collapse, right? But let's look at it from another perspective. Remember, when you say city, fewer people own homes in the city. Most people in a city rent. People rent in the city. They're in apartments and skyscrapers and high rises. People rent in the city. All right. So again, if renters are fleeing the city, then the owners are stuck with empty buildings. You feel me? So no, that's going to depress your real estate. If I own a building, an apartment building with 20 floors on it, and I'm normally at 80 to 90% occupancy, but because of this mass fleeing, I'm down to 40% occupancy, I'm in trouble. Or even less than that. What if I'm down to 20% occupancy? I am in trouble. And then you'll get situations in these big cities where owners just walk away, like in New York City. You know how many owners walked away from their buildings because of the taxes and the maintenance and upkeep? They said, forget, I'm out. Bye. Yeah. So then the city has to come in and take over. Think about that. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. So again, there are too many realities to have to really focus on what's really going on and how this is going to affect everybody. No one gets to escape. No one escapes. No one. It's just what it is. It is what it is. And we have to deal with it. Now, as things get worse with the economy, right? Yeah, commercial real estate is even worse. Absolutely. Now, there's no way that everybody in the city could just migrate to the suburbs. There is not enough rental properties for them. All right, it's not enough. It's not enough. So everyone won't be able to do it. But then you have other issues like homelessness, like in Seattle. All right, you got increased homelessness. If they can't the city, they still get evicted from their homes. But now where are they going to go? See what I'm saying? So it's a mess. It's a mess. Okay. Now, of course, the worse things get as the economy is going down, normally propaganda goes up. And they have to continue to manipulate through their media, through their mainstream media, and now even their social media. For those that are not aware, let me just, or new or late to what's going on, the mainstream media has a strong foothold now in social media. All right, by way of your social platforms like Facebook and Twitter and all these and YouTube. All right, they have taken over the social platforms. So mainstream media is social media. All right, they run the social media. And so they are operating there as well. So because of this and the propaganda being turned up, now you have the constitutional republic versus the pure democracy. The U.S. election process has changed. Okay. Now, according to ammo.com, Sam Jacobs quote says, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And that is the Pledge of Allegiance with a revision made in 1923. Now, conservatives are generally quick to point out that America is a republic, not a democracy. But what really is the difference, or are they even right? Voting in America has changed considerably since the days of our founding fathers, right? Back then, the government didn't even print official ballots. Instead, you got ballots from the candidate who wanted your support. Sometimes voting took place in public, so everyone knew who you were voting for. And of course, the franchise was largely restricted to white male property owners. Now, anyone who turns 18 can vote, and the Democratic Party wants to increase ballot access by automatically registering anyone who gets a driver's license. Democrats even push for mail-in ballots for the 2020 election to make voting even easier and more open to voter fraud. But is any of this a good thing? Now, for those of you also who are new to this channel, then perhaps you missed it when I covered many, many moons ago how I knew someone in a major voting industry who, beyond a shadow of a doubt, and this was during a party, told me that all of the voting machines, especially the new digital ones, had back doors, all of them, and could be manipulated easily. All of them. All of them have a back door. In case you didn't know or you were out hiking in the desert, every electronic device pretty much that is created or manufactured has a back door for the federal government. All right? Sorry to burst the bubble, but it just does. It does. Okay? It does. There were even reports, and this was funny. The mainstream media was reporting on stuff, showing where voter fraud and stuff was taking place There were people who showed, even posted videos on YouTube where they went to go vote, and no matter what you voted for, it the computer would register every vote will go to this one person. So let's say here we are in 2020, you go to the voting booth, you know, it's all push button, you know, like your smartphone, and everyone's voting for, let's say, Trump. And let's say out of everyone who voted, let's say only 1,000 people in the country vote, and all 1,000 voted for Trump. All 1,000 people who voted was like, yeah, my man gonna win, right? And then you find out they say, nope, the other candidate won. You'd be like, what in the world? And then it comes out after an investigation that no matter who you chose to vote for, all the votes were automatically going to be logged for Trump. That would anger a lot of people. But that's exactly what can and does and will and is happening. All right, so just something to think about. Now, here's a brief history of the franchise in America. All right. If you open your pocket constitution and find the part where it says who can vote and who can't, you'll come up short. That's because the Constitution delegates this right to the states. And while there are some amendments that, for example, say states can't restrict the franchise on the basis of race, gender, or being over the age of 18, otherwise, there is a broad leeway given in terms of who can vote and who can't. Okay. Before the United States existed, people were still voting, and there were oftentimes even more restrictions in place. Property qualifications were most common, but there was often also a religious test involved. For example, Plymouth Colony required that voters be orthodox in the fundamentals of religion, which would have likely excluded even Catholics from voting. Indeed, Catholics, Quakers, and Baptists were frequently forbidden from voting in early colony elections. Jews were forbidden from state office in Maryland until 1828 because of a state law requiring affirmation of belief in an afterlife. Now, one of the first laws drafted by the new nation was a process for people to become citizens and thus be able to vote in places where citizenship was a requirement to do so. And indeed, citizenship was not a requirement in many states or colonies in the early days of America. Now, while only natural-born citizens can become president, naturalized citizens enjoy the full benefits of the franchise. There is still much debate as to what qualifies as a natural-born citizen, and it's worth noting that several recent major party presidential candidates were not born in the United States. Most recently, Tulsi Gabbard, who was born in American Samoa, and Ted Cruz, who was born in Canada. All right, and don't forget Barack Obama, who knows where he was born. The Republican nominee in 2008, John McCain, was born in the Panama Canal Zone. The last of these was the most problematic, as Downs versus Bedwell ruled that unincorporated territories were explicitly not the United States. Now, while it's easy to ascribe this to petty religious bigotry, the reason is actually somewhat more profound. The colonists and the colony governments that they formed considered it important to only allow the franchise to people who shared their values. Thus, those with heterodox religious beliefs were not allowed to vote on the grounds that doing so would undermine both the values and the liberty of the colony. Forget about your personal liberty. It was about the liberty of the colony. Now, similarly, property holders were meant to be the main voters for the simple reason of having skin in the game. The early colonists did not want, for example, the merchant class to have an outside say in politics because they were not tied to the land and thus not as subject to bad decisions. A shopkeeper or importer can simply sell their stock and move on to the next colony. A freeholder working the land with his family has far less flexibility, and the theory goes anyway, will be making more long-term decisions about what is best for the policy. Now, what this meant also is that in places like New Jersey, women were allowed to vote until 1807, provided that they could meet the property requirement. What changed in the early 19th century under the expansion of the franchise under the Jacksonian democracy was that race and gender were prized more than property rights. But free blacks still had the right to vote in some northern states until 1838. Now, this too was not an arbitrary distinction. Men who had been veterans of the War of 1812, or at the very least defended their community against Indian raids, believed that they were entitled to the franchise on the basis of that service. But by 1856, free white men were allowed to vote without meeting any property requirements. But 5 of the states still kept tax requirements, frequently a poll tax, in place. Now, again, this makes sense, right? The force of government is largely about the spending of taxes and the use of the military. But by 1856, all property requirements had been lifted, but tax requirements remained in place in Rhode Island and Pennsylvania until the 20th century. Rhode Island had what was basically a brief low civil war over the question of property requirements known as the Dorr War. Indeed, anytime that post-Civil War disenfranchisement is discussed, it must include a discussion of the disenfranchisement of poor whites as well. The Battle of Athens is a fascinating tale of World War II veterans returning from battle and refusing to be shafted at the ballot box anymore. Of the 15 constitutional amendments passed since the Civil War, 4 involved the franchise. The 15th Amendment bars states from restricting the franchise on the basis of race, the 19th from restriction on the basis of gender, the 24th bars any tax requirements, and the 26th bars any age restrictions against those who are over the age of 18. Yet another amendment, the 17th, allows for the direct election of senators rather than having them elected by the respective state legislator. Another expansion of pure democracy in America, though not an expansion of the suffrage per se. The previous method of electing senators, having them appointed by the representative state legislators, was not an oversight of the part of the founders. Rather, this was to give a voice to the state governments and the federal government. This was seen as an important safeguard against the overreach of the federal power. Among other things, the Senate was a check on a power-hungry federal government seeking to put its tentacles into anything it could, like today. It was a form of distributed power that was yet another attempt by the founders to prevent consolidation and centralization of government. Again, they wanted to put a stop to that. They did not want consolidation and centralization of the government, but that's what we have today. Now, it's worth noting that Western states, starting with Wyoming in 1869, were granting women the right to vote, largely as an enticement to get them to move to the region, which was seriously devoid of women. The concept of one man, one vote is the cornerstone of a more pure democracy. There were 3 decisions of the Earl Warren Supreme Court that definitely transformed the landscape of America into a democracy. Now, Baker versus Carr found that federal courts had jurisdiction over state redistricting efforts. Now, Westbury versus Sanders found that U.S. House of Representatives districts whose borders are determined by state governments must be roughly equal in population. And yet, Reynolds versus Sims found that the state legislative districts must be roughly equal in population regardless of chamber. This effectively means that states are not allowed, again, not allowed to have institutions like the Senate, for example. A state government cannot give each county 2 seats in the state legislature if the counties do not have roughly the same population size. Residency requirements are mostly illegal in the United States, with 1-year requirements struck down in Dunn versus Blumstein. The longest residency requirement that states are allowed to have now is 50 days. 50 days, that's it. No more, no less. So then the question becomes, what's so wrong with democracy? All of this raises the question of what is wrong with democracy as opposed to a constitutional republic. It's a cliche that democracy is the right of 51% of the population to take away the toothbrushes of the other 49. The Constitution provides protections against the tyranny of the majority, and one of those protections is against pure democracy. Indeed, the Senate and the Electoral College, 2 of the last vestiges of the anti-democratic mood that penetrated the country during the revolutionary times, provide protections to rural states to this day. Without either of these, or with a Senate converted into a proportional representation body, as some have suggested, rural states are effectively political serfs for the larger urban centers. Again, not only are you feeling the pinch for people leaving the inner cities and going out to the country and the suburbs, but now here is some unintended consequences and ramifications of that, because now it's going to hit and show in the ballot box. See what's going, see the circular situation is happening as the snowball is rolling down the hill, gaining momentum, rolling down the hill. Now, the counter argument presented to this is that land doesn't vote, which is fair enough. But again, America was not conceived as a pure democracy where everyone had an equal say in everything. There are many layers to the onion, many tiers that prevent one group of the population from having too much say over the others. Why does this not apply to special interest groups? Why is Black Lives Matter and Antifa taking over the conversation? Something to think about. Think about it. No one group of the population should have more say over the others. All right? But see, we've gotten around that with special interest groups. Something to think about. How is that? How are you allowing the process to be subverted like that? Now, the Electoral College and the Senate allow rural states to have a voice in how the country is run, rather than being totally ruled over by people in urban centers who don't even own guns, can't grow food, and have never met their neighbors. Again, the pros and cons of city life versus rural life. It's not a coincidence that Electoral College abolition is a particular axe ground by the left. The abolition of the Electoral College will allow for sweeping changes in American public policy championed by those currently on the leftward edge of the political spectrum. Do you want to live in a country where, for example, the voters of smaller states like Nevada, New Hampshire, and Montana are drowned out by a handful of cities on the coast? What of medium-sized states with a number of post-industrial cities with their own concerns, just as valid as those of rural America, but entirely separate from the centers of financial, cultural, and academic power. There's also the small matter of the role that the media plays in shaping public opinion, as well as the role that public works projects and other government spending play in essentially buying votes. Ostensibly, undemocratic institutions act as brakes on the manipulation of public opinion. Indeed, the Senate was specifically designed as a deliberate body that would cool the passions of the masses represented in the lower house, the House of Representatives. The primary system as a laboratory of democracy. Again, the entire system, which is the primary system, as a laboratory of democracy. All right. The primary process for nominating presidential candidates represent an excellent example of how pure democracy has produced poor results than a more managed and directed one. Most Americans, particularly younger ones, don't know that prior to the 1970s, the primary contest didn't mean much. Rather, it was the state party conventions which held greater weight, and these were largely managed by party bosses rather than directly influenced by voters. It's not that the system of backroom wheeling and dealing never produced a total dud or stifled genuine needs for reform. Of course it did. However, looking at the roster of candidates produced by this process, i.e., two Roosevelts, a Coolidge, an Eisenhower, and a Kennedy, it's hard to argue with the results. What was entirely lacking was the current primary process that we have in the United States, which still boasts a very low overall turnout and lasts from approximately the fourth quarter of the year before the election, sometimes all the way up until the convention. Now, all told, the Democratic primary cycle of 2020 had 12 debates planned, with 11 of them completed, and the 12th not happening simply because Joe Biden said he wasn't going to show up. Or maybe he forgot to show up. Who knows? The primaries are dominated by highly motivated and often highly ideological voters. This means that a number of highly polarized figures have made it through the modern primary process, including Barry Goldwater, 1964, so a little early. And George McGovern, but also a ton of people who the party in question loved, but Americans just plain didn't like. Examples of this being Walter Mondale, Michael Dukakis, and Mitt Romney. Now, this is because party bosses were much more concerned about someone who could win and all the patronage that flowed from that rather than someone who shared their ideological values. Now, President Eisenhower is perhaps the gold standard of a president anointed by party bosses. Senator Robert Taft, the leading light of the ideological conservative faction of the party, lost to the choice of the party bosses. General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, while historical counterfactuals are hard to tease out, there's little reason to believe that Senator Taft could have won a general election against President Truman or eventually nominee Senator Alda Stevenson. This is because while there was a big thirst to roll back the whole of the New Deal among the hardcore Republican base, there was virtually no taste for it in the American mainstream, which either liked the program or had learned to live with them. Now, indeed, it is largely believed that the delegates themselves might have preferred Taft to Eisenhower, but they preferred Eisenhower to losing. It's worth noting that in the last two Democratic primaries, party bosses have leaned heavily on the scale against insurgent candidate Bernie Sanders in favor of, respectively, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. Now, in contrast, Donald Trump was able to cost them big time because they underestimated him. Therefore, he was able to coast to the nomination in 2016 without any significant organized chicanery on the part of the party bosses. But it's not just political parties who lose when American presidential candidates are the result of a process catering to a very small niche of the electorate. America loses also because we're incapable of having substantial issue-driven debates that address real problems of the American people. Instead, we end up focusing much more on the personalities and cultural differences that divide the two parties to the detriment of the entire nation. And this is why I always say that there's no such thing as Democrat and Republican. It's only one party, and they all agree on everything behind closed doors. This brings us to another uncomfortable part of this, which is election fraud in the United States. There's dispute as to whether or not there is widespread election fraud in the United States. However, there are three presidential elections that merit a brief discussion in our exploration of the franchise in America. Let's start with the 1876 election. The election of 1876 was so controversial and potentially fraud-ridden that it was the subject of a Congressional Electoral Commission in response to a major constitutional crisis. There were 20 electoral votes outstanding, with the Democratic candidate one shy of winning, with the 20 outstanding electoral votes all coming from the states with potentially massive voter fraud. The commission was convened by the Democratic House and the Republican Senate, with 5 members from each body and 5 from the Supreme Court of the United States. One of the tricks in question is actually an exploit of pure democracy. In those days, there were no official ballots. Ballots or tickets were generally printed up by political parties or their partisans and distributed to voters. Southern Democrats used ballots with Abraham Lincoln on them in an attempt to fool illiterate voters into voting for their slate. Tilden or blood was a slogan at the time of the Democratic candidate. Samuel Tilden's supporters declared that they had 100,000 men ready to march on the Capitol and install him as president if need be. A party line vote of the Electoral Commission gave all the voters the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes, making him president. However, as a concession, the South got the end of Reconstruction, the withdrawal of all remaining federal troops. Democrats remained unsatisfied with the House of Representatives, going as far to pass a non-binding resolution declaring Tilden the winner. The Electoral Count Act of 1887 made the state legislature the definitive arbiter of who counted as an elector, which was the subject of Bush versus Gore, another controversial election over 100 years later. The 1960 election. The 1960 election was disputed as well, but not formally and officially back in 1876. The claim is this, that the Democratic Party used friendly city machines in Dallas and Illinois to win states for John F. Kennedy that he otherwise would not have won, and that would have delivered the presidency to Republican Richard Nixon. This is not a marginal theory. Senators such as Everett Dirksen and Barry Goldwater have stated that they believe there was fraud in the election. All told, Republicans in 11 states sought to have the vote overturned, including in Illinois and Texas. A special prosecutor charged 650 people with voter fraud, but there were no convictions. How can there be no convictions? But you got 600 wow, interesting. It is unknown to what degree Nixon felt he had been cheated, but he never seriously pursued it, believing it would divide the nation and tarnish the office of the presidency. Yeah, like he really cared about that? No, I think it was a little bit more than that. I think he was told that this is what you're going to do. You're going to stand down or you're going to lay down. The 2000 election. I remember this one very well. Finally, there is the 2000 election where chicanery is alleged to have taken place not at the ballot box, but at the Supreme Court. It was the Supreme Court who stopped the recount under the Equal Protection Clause because they did not approve of how the recount was being carried out. Further, a new standard could not be agreed upon because of the time frame. Electors had to be selected by December. This allowed a previous vote count certified by Secretary of State Catherine Harris, a Republican and Bush family ally, to stand. Here, the question was not about whether or not someone was ballot box stuffing. No one had seriously or credibly proposed this. What was in question is how the votes were counted. This calls to mind an apocryphal quote often attributed to Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, quote, "The people who cast the votes decide nothing. The people who count the votes decide everything," end quote. That goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, that the electronic voter machines can be rigged so that no matter who you vote for the person they want you to vote for. Now, several have written that if a statewide recount were done rather than a country-based one, that it was Vice President Al Gore who would have won. But the question here is, what was the best way to count the votes? And unsurprisingly, partisans of both parties prefer the method resulting in their candidate winning. You think? Now, excuse me. Here's why democracy is bad in this execution. Once the notion of a universal franchise enters the public vernacular, there's then no limit on who should be included. Andrew Yang became the first major party presidential candidate to endorse lowering the voting age to 16. Excuse me, but others have endorsed removing age requirements for voting entirely. Indeed, there is an entire current of thought that says that citizenship shouldn't be a requirement. It isn't in some municipal elections, or even that the entire world should be allowed a say in who becomes the president of the United States. Wow. That's like saying, okay, mom and dad, the entire world is going to vote now on what you do for family night tonight. You don't have a say. We're going to tell you what you're going to do. While these might all sound like ridiculous proposals, which they are, and we agree that they are the thin edge of the wedge, the tip of the spear that will eventually introduce this kind of discourse into the political mainstream, and perhaps much sooner than anyone thinks. If the only criteria for who gets to vote is that you are affected by government policy or some such, and thus entitled to say, why not let the entire populations of France and Bangladesh and China have a vote? There's a logic to universal suffrage that does not end with America's adult population or even at its borders. Consider the fight against voter ID laws in the United States. When one accepts that voting is a universal right, it makes perfect sense that having or not having an ID shouldn't be an impediment to exercising that right. A lack of voter ID laws has been tied to voter fraud. Perhaps more disturbing is the growing practice of ballot harvesting. Whoa. I've heard of egg harvesting, but ballot harvesting? Really? Ballot harvesting? The Democratic Party likes ballot harvesting so much that they tried to insert it into the stimulus and relief bill targeted at people suffering from the effects of the Wuhan coronavirus outbreak of 2020. Put simply, this is when paper ballots are collected by intermediaries between the state and the voter, then delivered in mass. If this sounds like it's a right place for voter fraud to happen, that's because it is. Ballot harvesting played a role in the do-over of the 2019 North Carolina election, where Democrats were perhaps for the first time ever deeply concerned with the specter of voter fraud. Orange County, California was home to a whopping 250,000 ballots delivered on election day alone. In practice, ballot harvesting go around collecting ballots for people who vote for the candidate they want to win. In the case of North Carolina, there were allegations that ballots had been discarded because people voted for the wrong candidate. It's not the first time Orange County, California has been in hot water. What about the $1 billion it lost back in the 90s due to a rip your face off Wall Street financial scam? In the wake of the Wuhan coronavirus outbreak, there has been a push, mostly from Democrats, to offer mail-in ballots. They'll say, hey, everything's locked down anyway. Mail-in ballots, why not? Now, these are different from absentee ballots, which are sent out to specific voters on a by-request basis. Compare this to with the push for mass mail-in voting. There's just printing up a ton of ballots, sending them out, and letting everyone mail them in. There are few, if any, protections in place for preventing people from voting twice, preventing non-registered voters from voting, or preventing illegal aliens from voting. For every person who votes that shouldn't, a legal voter has their vote canceled out or nullified. There's not much of a way to verify and track this process to ensure that everyone who votes is having their vote counted. But again, it is very much in keeping with the logic of one man, one vote. Those who espouse the ideology of a pure democracy are always looking for ways to make it easier for people to vote. Perhaps not coincidentally, making it easier for people to vote also opens up the door to electoral fraud. And this is really the crux of the matter when it comes down to pure democracy. The transition to a pure democracy has coincided with greater influence among unofficial kingmakers who control the process while also consolidating greater power in Washington, D.C. Now, in practice, this has meant favoring a bureaucratic elite who effectively act as unelected legislators. Most of the regulations put in place by the alphabet soup of federal agencies aren't there by statute, but are in fact part of powers delegated to them by the legislator who have abdicated their legislative authority. What's more, these unofficial kingmakers are often shadowy figures whose names, to say nothing of their intentions, are mostly unknown. Again, shadow government ring a bell? These are not the traditional party bosses who were, in a sense, beholden to their people in the form of having to provide patronage and pork and other tangible results. No, no, no. Rather, the new kingmakers of the pure democracy are the mass media, party activists, and others with no skin in the game and little in the way of public accountability. Their angle is one entirely of self-interest and not the broader body politic, to say nothing of future generations. I have to tell you guys, among all the other things that the nations of the world are having to deal with today, this is a big one. People waking up and realizing that their vote really doesn't count. They're waking up and realizing that presidents are not elected, but presidents are selected. That hurts, but it's a reality, and it's one that people need to deal with. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, roll up your sleeves, man, and get ready to dig in. The dirt is deep and it's muddy, but we got to deal with this stuff. So with that being said, don't forget to smash that like button. Please don't forget to smash that like button. Hook me up, do me a solid, man. And the rest of you who are not breaking bread with us, what are you doing for your life? Why are you letting all this money run past you? Come to PulseWaveTrading.com, man. Excuse me, break bread with us. See how we do this. And remember, bulls make money, bears make money, and pigs get slaughtered. So remember to take what you can and give nothing back. Peace.